Formula One's big 2026 engine reset, it was supposed to level the playing field for everyone. New rules, new fuels. The whole idea was to get a closer fight. But what if I told you the war might have already been won? Right now, there are these huge rumors swirling around the paddock, a massive loophole that could, and I mean could, predetermine the entire 2026 season before a single car even hits the track.
So at the heart of all this drama is this simple conflict. The new rules for 2026 are crystal clear. The maximum compression ratio is 16-1. End of story. But the rumor mill says that some teams have figured out a way to run their engines at a much, much higher 18-1. So the big question is, how on earth are they doing this legally? Well, the answer, it turns out, is a brilliant little bit of physics.
And that brings us to what everyone's calling the thermal expansion trick. Now, I know it sounds super complex, right? But the basic idea is actually something you probably learned back in high school science class. When things get hot, they expand. Let's dig into how that one simple idea could be twisted into an absolutely massive F1 advantage. All right, so first things first, let's do a super quick refresher on what a compression ratio even is. In the simplest terms, it's just a measure of how much you can squeeze that mix of fuel and air inside an engine cylinder right before it goes bang. And it's pretty straightforward. The more you squeeze it, the bigger the explosion, and the more power you get out of it. It is one of the most fundamental ways to make an engine more powerful and more efficient. Okay, now here's the juicy part. This is where we get into the fine print of the FIA's rulebook. The rule says very clearly the max compression ratio is 16-1. But, and this is the key to everything, it's how they measure it. It's measured in the garage while the engine is cold. And that one little detail, well, that's where this whole loophole lives and breathes. So check this out. This is the genius of it. The car is sitting in the garage. The FIA scrutineers come over, they measure the engine while it's cold. And guess what? It passes. Perfectly legal at 16-1. But then the car goes out on the track. As that engine is screaming down a straight, it gets unbelievably hot, right? And the rumor is that some very, very clever engineers have designed specific internal metal alloys that are meant to expand and literally shift their shape with that heat. So the actual geometry inside the cylinder changes on the fly, pushing the effective compression ratio on the track all the way up to that magical 18-1 figure. It's totally legal in the garage, but it's a completely different animal out on the circuit. Incredible! Okay, so it's a really clever physics trick. We get that. But what does that actually mean when the rubber hits the road? What does it do for lap times? Well, this is where a tiny technical detail explodes into a huge on-track advantage. Right. First up, power. The engine gurus are estimating that this jump from a 16-1 to an 18-1 ratio is worth about an extra 15 horsepower. Now you have to remember, this is Formula One. Teams will spend millions of dollars just to find a single horsepower. So getting 15 in one go, that is an absolutely massive, massive gain. And okay, what does that power do to the stopwatch? On tracks where power is king, think places like Spa or Monza, that 15 horsepower advantage is estimated to be worth up to 0.3 of a second, a lap. Now, to put that into perspective for you, 0.3 of a second is huge. It's often the difference between starting on pole position and starting all the way back in 5th place on the grid. That is the kind of advantage that doesn't just win you a single race, it can define an entire world championship season. It is, quite simply, a total game changer. So, as you can probably imagine, an advantage this big has sent absolute shockwaves through the paddock. And it's created what looks like an impossible dilemma for the sport's governing body, the FIA. And yeah, the rival teams are furious. We're hearing reports that Ferrari, Honda, and even the incoming Audi team are all demanding that the FIA has to intervene. Their whole argument is that, look, maybe this thing technically follows the letter of the law, but it completely shreds the spirit of the regulations. That 16-1 limit was supposed to be a hard ceiling on performance, not just some starting point to cleverly engineer your way around. But here's the FIA's big problem, right? These rules were locked in years ago. And since then, teams have poured literally hundreds of millions of dollars and who knows how many thousands of hours into their 2026 engine designs. If the FIA changes the rule now, this close to launch, it would force some teams into a complete and ruinously expensive redesign. Honestly, it might just be too late to do anything without causing absolute chaos. And so, this all boils down to that classic Formula One debate, doesn't it? Is this an act of sheer engineering genius, or is it just cynical foul play? You know, this is hardly the first time we've seen a team play in a gray area like this. I mean, just think back to Mercedes' brilliant DAS system in 2020.
The driver could literally pull the steering wheel to change the front wheel alignment on the straights. No one saw it coming. It was totally legal for 1 year. And then the FIA banned it. Exploiting these little loopholes, it's just written into the very DNA of Formula One.
There's this saying in the paddock that pretty much sums up the whole philosophy. They didn't break a rule, they just found a space where the rules didn't exist yet. You see, the greatest engineering minds in Formula One, they don't really see a rule book. They see a set of boundaries, and their entire job is to find the gaps in between them.
So I guess the question is, where do you land on this? Is exploiting something like thermal expansion just the next chapter in Formula One's long history of pure engineering brilliance, or is it a step too far, a cynical move that the FIA has to shut down to protect the whole point of the 2026 regulations? The entire future of the championship might just